Hello, good morning, and happy Friday. This is Rico Manalo with another episode of All Aces on Air. I am joined today by our special guest and my good friend, Mario Siddhartha Portugal Ramirez, whom I met in the Summer Institute on Conflict Transformation Across Borders in Ecuador. That's a summer program through the UMass Boston Department of Conflict Resolution. It's run by Dr. Jeff Pugh in association with his foundation, SEMPROC, and Flaxo Ecuador. While we were doing this summer program, Mario took some of us who were in the Summer Institute to visit a traditional healer at a market. And what really struck me was not just how differently medicine was approached, but how accurately this traditional healer was able to identify certain unhealthy traits that each of us who were going to the market to have looked at. Well, for me, it was really like the healer understood that I don't always deal with stress very well. And so the recommendation that I got was to walk in my bare feet on grass and stones, which actually was incredibly relaxing. And so after having that understanding that was more of approaching healing through processes of like mental and emotional well-being, it really kind of struck me that there's something that we can learn from that. So we are going to talk about traditional healing and Mario's specialty, which is medical anthropology, which I want to stress right now is not the same as somebody who is studying to get a medical degree. But I hope by the end of this session that you will see that it is also a very, very valuable skill set to have, and that we can really learn a lot from it. I should also mention that Mario is publishing a political magazine that is coming out soon, I believe. And the name of it is La Fanesca Politica. So before we kind of crack into what we're here about today, Mario, could you explain that title for our audience who might not speak Spanish so fluently?
Yes, thank you so much, Rico. Thanks for having me today. Well, this magazine, which now is currently is a blog, the name comes from a soup from Ecuador, Fanesca,
Mm-hmm.
which is like a soup for a holiday. And this soup has like several ingredients, and actually it's delicious. I tried that many times in Ecuador. And the idea behind the name of the magazine Fanesca Politica is that we are like a group of people who are currently writing and sharing our writings in the blog. And we have different points of view, we have different research interests. Sometimes we even have different ideas about the same topic. But at the end of the day, we have like this harmonic vision about the world and how to transform the world. And all of these different points of view become something, if you want, like this soup, like something that you can try, that you can read. Mhm.
Yeah, I love that idea because it talks about diversity of viewpoints in a way that's not like in the US, we use the melting pot analogy or sometimes increasingly the salad analogy, but I like the stew or the soup analogy because really that's a transformative kind of process and the ingredients kind of they work on each other and bring each other into greater relief or contrast. So fantastic. All right. So, Mario, please, please, please help me and our audience understand as clearly as you can. Well, what is medical anthropology? And my follow-up question to that is, what made you fall in love with it?
Okay, so medical anthropology is a subdiscipline of anthropology. Anthropology is like a big umbrella. There are like different specializations, like many of the disciplines in social science and in other sciences. And medical anthropology is interested in the social processes, in the cultural representations about health, disease, and also healthcare itself. So you can see different health-related issues. For instance, you can analyze the relationship between the doctor and the patients. You can analyze how we feel or what we think about disease or about our health. You know that sometimes we have even if we have the same disease, we experience the disease from different ways because our cultural background.
Mm.
For instance, is the stress that you were saying with your experience in Ecuador. The idea of the stress maybe for indigenous people uh, won't won't have a meaning.
Yeah.
They will feel the stress if you want in their body, but for them maybe they won't even have the word stress. Maybe that will be more like a feeling that something in their lives is not correct, or maybe it's because someone is having bad talks about this person.
So it's
So
like an
you can,
imbalance kind of thing.
yes, yeah, exactly. It's like a non-balance, but they won't have the word stress, and you know that there are like many ways, even to combat this kind of diseases or illness. For instance, I don't know. Maybe some people, if you have stress, maybe you will go out with your friends. Some other people maybe will try to go to the countryside.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
really like I really like biking, for instance, when I'm stressed. So the medical anthropologists will try to connect all these ways to understand, to experience what is health and what is a disease.
Okay.
So you will notice that there are like different understandings of that.
So
Mhm.
just to kind of collect back what you said, a lot of people maybe don't realize it, but our understanding of treating disease is culturally
Mhm.
bound, correct? As
Yes.
is our experience of those disease symptoms. So to
Yes.
kind of talk about the experience that I was describing at the top of our show, if I'm remembering correctly, what the woman said to me was that there was like bad air kind of moving around
Mhm.
some part of my body, and that's why I was not managing my stress well, and why I needed to spend time outdoors and having my feet touch the earth and things like that. Uh,
Yes, exactly. So, for instance, what she told you that time about this bad air, I'm not sure if in the U.S. exists this idea, but this bad air is pretty common for many Latin American countries. And sometimes, for instance, people believe that when you are like walking in at a specific place, for instance, let's say a cemetery or near to the mountains where there are no people around. So
mhm.
there is this bad air, which is
Ah,
something like pretty specific, and this bad air will touch your body, and then you will get sick. And it's not like it's not the flu itself. You will have symptoms like stress, headaches,
mhm.
uh, maybe stomach ache or other symptoms, but it's not the flu.
Right,
So there are like these more let's say cultural diseases that sometimes traditional healers believe that, and also people, of course, that we think that we can have, and of course, it's something that a regular doctor cannot heal. So in those cases, they will say that you need a traditional healer.
yeah. So that's an interesting element to bring in. That it is this not only among certain isolated groups do these practices or beliefs exist, but it actually pervades a lot of the different places that people inhabit in South America, because there is that kind of exchange of cultures that has happened throughout history. And so I'm really wondering, because our focus today is on Bolivia, where you come from, how have you, like, turning your medical anthropological lens as well as your sociological lens on what's happening in your own country? Like, how have you seen, uh, your own culture approaching disease? I mean, we're obviously dealing with a major pandemic right now, so I'm very curious. The U.S., of course, has been in the news a lot, but we don't really hear too much about other countries except for the ones that we trade with the most. So it might be interesting for our audience to peek inside your world a little bit.
Mhm. Well, the pandemic, as I think in general, the other countries in the world, it wasn't expected at all. It caught us with a health system that wasn't prepared for this kind of pandemic. And in the particular case of Bolivia, we by the time that the pandemic started, we were dealing with an epidemic, dengue fever epidemic,
Oh,
which was one of the worst in the last 10 or 15 years. And well, the dengue fever is especially in the area that is close to the Amazons. Like,
right. And so for
yeah.
those who are listening that don't really know
Mhm.
what dengue fever is, it's a mosquito-borne disease that affects blood platelets. And the other charming name for it is, in English, is
Mhm.
bone break fever, because it feels like your bones are actually breaking.
Yeah,
And
makes
uh,
sense. Makes
yes,
sense.
I myself have had dengue fever before, and it's not fun.
Yes, I had the dengue fever a couple of times some years ago, and you feel like someone is pushing your eyes from inside your skull.
Yes, yes.
And when
All
you
that.
are about to when like the last symptom of the dengue fever, you have like this allergy, and even if you cannot even rest because you feel like it's like painful. You cannot even wear clothes, so it's yeah,
Yeah,
it's a terrible thing, and you can die, of course, with dengue fever.
and yeah.
So that's why it's the dengue fever is. And I think by that time, in many other countries in South America, Brazil, Peru, those countries that actually have part of belong to the Amazonas, they had the dengue fever as well. They were dealing with that, and then we had the coronavirus pandemic, and we weren't prepared. We didn't have enough human resources and medical resources. So basically, it affected pretty bad to Bolivia. By August, we have more than 100,000 cases,
Mhm.
accumulated cases, and we have more like 4,000 diseases. So in some cities, and it happened as well in other countries such as Ecuador, at some point you had people dying in front of the hospitals or
Oh my
in the
God.
streets because the hospitals didn't have they didn't even have beds
So
for the
people,
people.
so people couldn't even go inside, like, at
No,
all.
no, because they didn't have enough space. The doctors were many doctors were sick at some point.
Like,
They
they were still
even
working, or no?
sorry.
Like, were the doctors sick and still working, or was it more like they were sick and not able to work?
They were not able to work because they had the coronavirus, many of them, because they didn't have all the equipment, face masks. Sometimes they didn't even have sometimes that. They were like using the face masks, like washing the face mask in order to use that the next day, things like that. So so we had these situations even at some cemeteries, because you know that the procedure with the bodies that die with coronavirus is you have to incinerate them, right? And you have to follow
Okay.
some measures.
Hmm.
And of course, we didn't have we weren't prepared for these procedures. Sometimes the families were not prepared. I think in general South America we have like a different view of death. So it's not like pretty common for us uh, to have a body incinerated.
So,
We go through all this.
yeah,
Yeah,
and I mean, my experience of South America is that it is largely Catholic as well, which I think adds another layer because one of the medical practices or, related cultural practices to death that I'm aware of, being raised Catholic myself, is that you are in fact not supposed to be cremated or incinerated because
cremated. Yeah.
the church says that you still need your body even after you're done using it, correct?
Yes, yes. And also among indigenous people, basically the same. And this is mixed with Catholic beliefs as well. But if you if you study indigenous population, you will find that they actually had many traditions about the dead body and how they manage the dead bodies, even
Mm.
before the Catholic Church was in Americas. So it was like a huge deal for us in the cities, because we had the lockdown, and at some point, police and even the army were in the streets controlling people not to go out.
Aha.
We had just one day to go and do the groceries, and it depended on the last number of your national ID.
Okay,
Uh,
so help me understand this quickly, and to help the audience understand. So you have a national identity card, which is not
yes,
the same as an American driver's license exactly, right?
no, 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 no. It's different. It's just a regular ID with a number and your data there.
Okay, so
Yes.
kind of, sort of like our social security card a little bit.
Yes, but we use that for. It's like the driver license in the U.S. You use that for everything, but
Okay,
we
and
have this specific.
so that number allows you to go out at a certain day of the week to get your groceries,
Yes,
and no other
depending
time.
on the last number.
Okay.
Yes, for instance, my ID ends in number 4,
Hmm.
and on Tuesdays, number 3 and 4 were allowed to go to the market or supermarket, to the bank.
Mm.
We have like a specific place to go, but because most of the places were closed, even uh, like recreation areas.
Okay.
Um, because, for instance, I was in Boston at the beginning of the pandemic, and I saw like people jogging or
Mhm.
walking dogs, but we were not allowed to do this kind of things here, because you can be fined or you can even go to jail.
Wow.
So it was like a experience in many countries in South America. Basically, did the same. So we were like living in our houses, and sometimes, of course, you have other kind of issues because um, uh, sometimes here many people lives in the same house or in the same room. So plenty of problems arose at that time.
Mm.
And concerning indigenous people, it was even difficult because, for instance, if you see the statistics about the positive cases, you will just find information about national data, maybe data in each city or even towns. but you won't find data on race, for instance. So you don't really know how many indigenous people were sick when the peak of the pandemic
If
was
I can just
here.
draw a little bit of a parallel for the audience, in the U.S., we've mostly been also getting health data, but for a long time under the pandemic, this data um, was not coded by different race or ethnicity. So it's just
Mhm.
an absolute number, like this many people had died. But what we know is that, well, there are equity issues that are involved with the treatment of disease under normal circumstances, and definitely so under a pandemic. And so the pattern that we're seeing here in the US is that those who are the most marginalized are also the most affected. And so we're seeing that a lot of the Latina community, as well
Yeah.
as the Black community, are the hardest hit by the virus. Now, these inequities show up differently in different countries. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, Mario, but the
Mm.
indigenous people in Bolivia are typically not the wealthy, typically not the city dwellers. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean there is a strong connection between poverty and your ethnic identity. And one thing that the people who are watching and listening this should know is that it's really terrible not to have this disaggregated information about indigenous people in a country that actually has 49% of the population that is indigenous people. So
I didn't realize that it was
49%.
49%. That's incredible. That's a
Yes,
huge.
so it's almost half of the population, right? So and we never had this information available according to the ethnicity.
Mhm.
We have, well, as in the case of the US at the beginning, we just have the numbers of people who were infected, and of course that gives you can give you a wrong idea of how people are experiencing the pandemic, because if you are like living in a city like me, like right now, you will have all this information on TV, on social media, that actually say you to stay at home,
Mhm.
wash your hands, use the face mask, these kind of things. But actually, many indigenous people who are living in the countryside, they don't have access to TV, they don't have access to internet, even to buy soap. It's like a luxury product,
Okay.
because in many communities they don't even have like money, or they don't have like supermarkets. And I would like to show for just a second one house. It's a picture about a house in a community that I worked some years ago for, when I was doing some research. So you can see, for instance, these kinds of houses. You will find this kind of houses in some indigenous communities. So they have
Mhm.
no electricity. Of course, they won't have internet nor TV. So it's impossible sometimes to reach them with information about.
Oh, did we lose Mario? Okay. Well, if I can just try to collect. Oh, sorry, you froze there for a moment, Mario.
Yeah,
You back?
yeah, we froze for a minute. Can you hear me
Okay.
now?
Yeah, it's still a little bit choppy, but let's see if I can do some summarizing just to catch us up. Um, So we're talking about the indigenous population and how it's not only that we're approaching things from kind of well, when I say we, but cultural practices of medicine are so deeply ingrained inside all of us that it's actually hard to connect people who really need these services and support because they are of a completely different culture and living in places where the dominant culture does not really exist. If you can all hold on for 1 minute, we are trying to fix the issue with Mario's connection. Sorry about this. Let's see here. All right, looks like we've lost Mario for the moment, but if there are any questions that are cropping up for people along the way, happy to take those. Let me see what we got here. Right, so one person watching has said that COVID information is now being tracked by race. Yes, I have seen that more and more. Because there was really a great outcry for disaggregated data, because at the beginning of the pandemic, it really was not. It was mostly in absolute numbers. So people actually had to lobby to get that to happen in their various towns. And if you will all recall, I wish I had it queued up, but I believe the first kind of major display of the disaggregated COVID data was actually in the New York Times, and they had a really kind of interactive kind of data display so that you could see how things were affecting different populations within the US. However, one wrinkle that Mario and I have talked about in the past in regard to medical anthropology is that in places like Bolivia, as we saw from that picture briefly, the government doesn't have a whole lot of influence in the areas where a lot of indigenous people are living. And so it's hard to count people, as I'm sure that we're all aware. Not everybody here participates in the census, and I think we can kind of extrapolate that out a little bit. And yeah, I can't think of a single place that I know of where people 100% participate in their census. So it's hard to get numbers either way, but then also there are extra levels of difficulty. Let's see. Other things. Looks like we are still having trouble with Mario's connection. We'll work on that. If there are any questions of people watching about that you would like Mario and I to cover when he is able to make it back into the studio, please do let us know. Yeah. Let's see, what can we do in the meantime? I guess we can talk about the other things that we have coming up for you. Miles, if you want to show the our next upcoming conversation, we can set that up a little bit for our audience, which will be with both Dr. T.M. Martin and a man named Michael Berkowitz, and that is happening on October 14th. They're going to be talking about emergency management and equity, which we think is going to be a really rich topic, especially because we're kind of setting it up with the, talking about the different ways that we can be taking a look at medicine today. If none of you are familiar with the Resilient Cities Catalyst, I urge you to check out that organization. It's really great to see an organization doing something specifically about resilient cities for a number of reasons. We see that cities have been really deeply affected during the coronavirus pandemic. And a lot of people might not know this, but in fact, a lot of the way that we approach things at All Aces is very much through Dr. Tia Martin's emergency management lens. So we have elements of that emergency management perspective very much baked into our own internal organizational culture, which I think actually gives us a slight edge over some of our competition, because it asks us to manage things in ways that are uh, really straightforward and really very intentional. There's like a lot of deliberate and intentional action that goes into that. So that should be very, very exciting as well. Following that talk, coming up on the 21st, I'll be talking to another close friend of mine, which is called The Smile. His project is called The Smile Project. His name is Bren Bataclan. Um, and we'll also be talking about Filipino American identity a little bit more. I'm getting the word that things are still a bit rocky on Mario's end, so we'll continue to work on that. Yes, very sorry about this, everybody. Let me see what else I can do behind the scenes here. Uh-huh. Well, it looks like we might have to pick this up another time, unfortunately, if the problem persists. So we'll just give this another minute or two, and then if it's not working out for us, then we'll just reschedule and we'll give it another try. If there are other comments about things that you've heard so far, like just reflecting on the idea that approaches to medicine hang within a culture and are influenced very, very deeply by those cultural values, then we'd love to hear your own personal stories as well. Oh, here he is.
Sorry, I don't really know what happened.
Okay. Yeah, things happen.
Yeah.
But you're back. That's the important thing.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Okay, so maybe that will explain why it's even difficult in Bolivia, because we don't really have good internet connections.
And you are
Um,
in the city, and you're the home that you're in right now is very much a middle class kind of home, correct?
yes, exactly. But still, you have this kind of troubles the whole time. Well, so I was saying that indigenous people now they didn't have enough information, and even sometimes the problem was that the information that they had about COVID-19 was in Spanish,
And they do not speak
and
Spanish,
yes, because they have their languages.
right?
And actually, I think what happened in between July and June, some organizations such as the Pan American Health Organization, they had a report, and they were concerned about indigenous people, not only in Bolivia, of course, but in all the Americas, because they noticed that um, the governments basically wasn't they weren't doing enough things to help them, and you have many troubles, not only the lack of electricity, the lack of internet, but sometimes in these communities you don't even have a health center. So when I was working with indigenous people doing a research about 9 years ago, for instance, I was in these communities, Guarani communities, and in some of these communities, they had to walk for 3 or 4 hours to the nearest health center.
Wow.
And in these health centers, they only provide like primary attention, which means like the basics. Maybe they will give you some medicines. But for instance, you want a specialist, if you need to be hospitalized, you have to go to the nearest town or city, because sometimes not even towns have good hospitals. Um,
So I
and
imagine
so
that transportation is also an issue if a lot of indigenous people are living in very rural areas. Is that correct?
yes, yes, because there's no public transportation, so there is no bus, no train, anything. If you so sometimes in these communities that I was talking, for instance, some cars like people from the nearest town, they did the service, and they just go from the town to the last community once a week.
Okay.
uh, and sometimes the indigenous people, well, sometimes they don't have enough money to pay that. um,
So
in
the cultural
2000.
connections, sorry, the cultural connections between the many indigenous people and the dominant Bolivian culture or the Bolivian state is really not strong at all. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, yes. I mean, it's part of the history of Bolivia, and I think many countries in South America, that the state was absent for indigenous people. So it happened from colonial times and continued during Republican times. So many communities, they didn't have access to, or at least enough access to education, health, and other kind of services. And you can even find that these days. In 2013, for instance, I was helping a friend. She's an anthropologist as well, and we were in this community. It was maybe a couple of hours driving. They don't have a road. It's like a road of dirt, and we had this storm for a couple of days, and there was no way to return by car to the town.
Oh,
So we had to use a small boat through the river, and it took us like 12 hours to get to the town.
oh man.
So you can imagine when you are living there, and if you have like an emergency, health emergency, uh, probably you will die before you even arrive to the doctor. And
Wow.
the other thing is that, and it's not only for indigenous people. Most of the people in Bolivia don't have a health insurance, because some studies says that almost 80% of the Bolivian population don't have like a formal job. So if you come to Bolivia or any country in South America, you will see people like selling things in the streets. Now, for instance, many people is selling a face mask or food.
Mhm.
So you don't really have like a proper job, and therefore you won't have an insurance. And of course, in the case of the indigenous people, it's even worse, because they don't even have access to this kind of things. So I think now in the cities we really struggle, especially, and sometimes it doesn't matter if you are considered as middle class, because your access to healthcare will be limited. But for indigenous people, it's even worse, because they don't even have hospitals near to their towns, to their communities. So of course that's makes things worse for them.
Yeah. So I'm really curious. given that you have been studying medical anthropology, I'm kind of wondering if you've been able to talk to anybody that you know in the various indigenous communities in Bolivia or in Ecuador, where you also studied. Um, I'm just kind of curious if there's any sense of how the traditional medical practices, or, well, so let me say it this way. If the indigenous population don't have ready access to the kind of medicine they need, and they're also being affected by coronavirus or even dengue fever, um, and as you say, it could be a very long way to get the kind of medical services that they need. What do they do instead?
Mhm.
Right. So if going 12 miles like down a river is not something that they want to do, are there alternatives?
Well, the alternative would be the traditional healer. So if you visit communities and even in cities, and I think you saw that in Ecuador, in Quito,
Hmm.
so you will find many kinds of traditional healers. Some of them are experts with herbal medicine. For instance, here in Bolivia, we have a specific indigenous people, the Cayahuayas, who have this tradition of healing since pre-colonial times and even pre-Inca times.
Whoa.
They use they know how to use specific herbs. They know how to prepare some medicines. Also, the midwives are pretty important in rural areas. And I think, for instance, the other day I was reading in the news that not only in Bolivia but in many countries in South America, midwifery was pretty important for rural areas
Mm.
because since we were locked down, we were not able to go to the hospital. So pregnant women had to deliver the baby in their houses. And the midwives, of course, they were important in the process. But in general, in rural areas, one person of reference at the beginning is the traditional healer,
Hmm.
because most of the time the traditional healer is just like a regular person in the community. Most of the time they also have to do another job, so it's like something that they do. They don't just work with traditional healing.
It's mostly like
uh,
a side business kind of thing.
Not really, at least in communities. Probably in the cities, yeah, they work with traditional healing, as you saw in Ecuador, for instance. You have people specialized in that, and they have their office, let's say their offices in some parts of the city. But in communities, most of the time, traditional healers, at least is what I saw all these years, they are like regular people living in the community, but they also have this knowledge.
Mm.
So when people is sick, in general, they go first to the traditional healer to see if they can help them. The traditional healer in general knows exactly what he can heal and what he cannot.
Ah, okay.
So the traditional healer will tell you, and I think this is a difference with other healers that you can find, because in the cities especially you will find healers that will tell you that they can cure cancer,
Oh, sure.
COVID-19, yeah, and sometimes there are just scammers.
Right.
But a
But
real tradition, huh?
if it's a community member, then it's somebody that maybe you've known for maybe your whole life, right?
Exactly, because it's your neighbor, probably it's your relative.
Yeah, right.
All the people know, they have like people have respect for these traditional healers, because there are like two ways on how you can become a healer. So you can learn from another traditional healer. Sometimes the traditional healers choose, could be a little kid or a little girl, uh, depending on how the traditional healer feels the capacity that this kid can have. And they choose someone and they teach all the knowledge that they have. And we have to have clear that this knowledge is coming from many generations, not only something that the traditional healer learned during his life. Uh, there are some other traditional healers that basically believe that they have like this special knowledge, special powers, if you want,
Okay.
and they receive that because they have like a particular experience in their lives. For instance, once, and I can maybe I can show another photograph where I'm doing an interview with this traditional healer with indigenous. Um, so I asked him, how did you become a traditional healer? Oh, here is it. Uh, it happened in 2010. So he told me that when he was a kid, he was walking, hunting with his dad, and then he was lost. They were like in the woods, and he was lost. And he said that he saw this strange animal, this strange being. It was like black, pretty hairy, something like a monkey, if you want, but according to him, looked more like a human being.
Oh,
And
so
yeah,
maybe something similar to Bigfoot or a
yes,
Yeti or
more or
okay.
less. I'm not sure if he knows what is the Bigfoot or the Yeti because this guy, I think he never knew about these things. But he told me that so this being came from a tree, and he ran into him pretty quick, opened his head.
Like he peeled off the skull or
Yes,
the scalp?
the
Oh,
skull is.
okay.
And he said, and he threw something inside my brain. And then I passed out for some minutes, and then my father found me, and I was by that time he said I was alone. And after some days, I had some fever, I had some aches in my body, especially in my head. And then he said that he started to have this knowledge. And I mean, you can believe this history or not, of course, but this is like those are like the two ways that indigenous people can
Yeah.
become healers.
So you
Uh,
either receive it from like some totally external source, like an event or a
yes.
encounter,
Mhm.
or you have it passed down to you by an older person in your community who has identified you as somebody who can accept this cultural history and this cultural knowledge, correct?
Yes, exactly. Um, also, within in Andean cultures, for instance, they believe that if you are hit by a lightning, and it happens,
By
sometimes
lightning.
happens, but a lightning, yes.
Oh,
So that makes you like a remarkable, a special person,
uh,
and
in Western culture also, kind of.
yeah, I mean, if you, especially if you survive to that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
You're not so
and
special if you don't survive it.
yes, and some healers, for instance, they would say that they were hit by a lightning when they were kids or something, and then they had this special knowledge.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, but I mean, I think it's just part of the whole imaginary about how to become a healer.
So as different as these understandings of gaining knowledge or proficiency in practicing medicine might seem to us in the U.S., for example. What are some things that you have learned from just learned looking through your lens of medical anthropology?
Mhm.
Like what lessons can we learn from traditional medical practices that could maybe help us to work on what's going on with coronavirus?
Um, First thing that I can say is that we should take into consideration how many indigenous people, how many traditional healers manage and know about herbal medicine.
Hmm.
Because you can find many herbs. One of the problems that I had, for instance, in the U.S. when I was living there these last 3 years, was that I couldn't find the specific herbs that I'm used to take, for instance, to make a tea.
Hmm.
So and of course these herbs have properties. The other thing that I would say that it's important um, to learn from them is that they take the disease not only as a individual problem,
Interesting.
not only as a physical problem. For them, when you get sick, it's not only a problem of you. It also affects your community, your family at the first place, but also your community and your environment. So they have this focus on the disease. So when the traditional healers are healing you, they want you to heal. They want to heal your body, your mind, the community, and also have again this harmony with your environment.
So they want to
So that
heal everything.
everything, yeah, it's more like a holistic view of the disease of health. And of course now contemporary medicine, scientific medicine has professionals working on that. So that's why we talk about, for instance, uh, we see the connection between environment and how environment affects health of the population. We think about mental health and so on. But sometimes, if you think that you have a specialist, so maybe you have one professional for mental health, but this person won't necessarily think about your environment and how
Yeah,
it's affecting your mental health, right?
absolutely.
Uh, but in the case of the traditional healers, they try to see all your surroundings when they start their procedures, their therapies. So I think
So
we should learn about that.
yeah, absolutely. It's really striking to me that you're saying that it's the environment, it's the family, it's the whole social context, right?
Mhm.
That is affected by an individual getting sick. If we're taking your medical anthropological lens and turning it on the U.S., uh, what would you say is not maybe going right here? I mean, we're great at treating symptoms, yes,
Mhm.
but as far as cultural effect, I don't know if you're seeing things that I'm not when I look out at the US. So I'd be interested to hear more.
Um, well, I want. I don't want to generalize, but I think that I noticed that in the U.S. It probably is not totally wrong, but in general, when people is feeling sick or getting sick, they just rely on what the doctor says. So the doctor, he or she is the main authority, and just a few people try to look for other alternatives or for something that is important that medical anthropology actually studies, which is the self care.
Hmm.
So Uh, I think especially if you come from indigenous roots, like in my case, your family will have several beliefs about how to heal yourself. For instance, in my case, if I get sick, my mother would tell me to drink like a lemonade or use this herb, or we have like different kind of therapies that actually belong to my family. Maybe some of them will be the same in other families, some others will totally different. But I think that we have this knowledge within our families related to health and diseases. And sometimes I would say that in the US, you are not like looking to this knowledge that is around in your family, within your family. So I think that it should is something important that maybe can change in the US. Um, the other thing that for me was, of course, difficult to understand was how the health system works in the US.
Honestly, man, I don't know how the health works. And my healthcare provider is always getting in touch with me, like, you got to do this thing, sign these papers. I'm like, I don't know what any of this means. I have no idea.
Yeah. So one other thing that I would say, for instance, that in general, doctors can learn from traditional healing, the traditional healers, is that, and I think you know this when we went to this traditional healer in Quito. So they want to be very close to you. They want this quality in their relationships. You know that most of the time, and of course sometimes it depends on the doctors, but especially if you are going to here in Bolivia, for instance, you go to a public health system. The doctors sometimes are stressed. They had to see many people during the day, and sometimes they can be really unpolite with you,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
to say the less, right?
Yeah. That's a polite way
Uh,
to say that they're not very polite.
yes. But in the case of the traditional healers, I noticed that they want to be really close to their patients. They want them to feel better.
And not
They
in a
want,
fake way, right? It's not just like, oh, it's so nice to see you. Like, they want
yes,
like a real relationship, so
yes,
they get to know the real you. Yeah.
yes, exactly. Because I think most of them believe that this is important to start your healing process to make you comfortable.
It makes sense. Like, how can you heal somebody if you don't even see who they are, right? I mean, that
Yes,
doesn't make any sense. Otherwise,
yes.
it's like here, like sometimes people joke, like, oh, going to the doctor is like going to the mechanic. They just
Uh,
swap out some different parts, just like, oh, yeah, get a new heart in this one, shove that back in.
yes, yes, exactly. So I think that is something that not only the US, I would say that can happen here. I visited some doctors in the US while I was living these last 3 years. Uh, and yeah, of course, some of them are really polite. I was feeling comfortable. Some others, I noticed that they did that because they had to. Uh, but there's another thing with traditional healers. Most of the time, they visit you. They go to your house to start the treatment.
Yeah.
Sometimes they will ask you to go to their houses, of course, because they have to do other procedures. But probably many people, and it's my case, I don't. I sometimes I don't really feel comfortable when I'm going to a hospital, and this is something that actually studies in medical anthropology and medical sociology studies how sometimes even the places where you are can have an effect over your health, or
Yeah.
at
You
least
know
on
what?
what you feel.
Whenever I go to the hospital, even if I know I'm not sick, by the time I leave the hospital, I feel sick every
Yeah,
time, every
can
single
happen.
time.
Yeah. So these kind of things, I think that we can learn about these things. I saw that in the last maybe 10 years, in some parts of the world, probably it's the same in the US now. Uh, so the midwifery became something, let's say, cool,
Yeah,
something
also
new,
becoming popular here. Yeah, or has been
right?
for a little while. Yeah,
Yeah. So for me, this is a really good step to return and to recover this knowledge of the midwifery, for instance. But at the same time, I noticed that it became something only for people who has certain economic level. So,
it's
for
mostly
instance,
rich white people who are getting midwives and what they call doulas here, which are another type of midwife, as far as I understand.
yeah. So I think that's. I mean, the traditional healing is not costly most of the time. I saw and well, and I also read some works that actually most of the time the traditional healer, especially in communities, they won't ask you for a retribution. And if you want to do the retribution, it's on you.
Mm.
So you will decide if you will give the traditional healer money, or sometimes because in the community they don't have a well, bills. They probably they gave some food to the traditional healer. But this is something interesting for me because these new midwives, for instance, they are really costly,
Yeah.
and it shouldn't be because at the end, healing is more like a service for the community, for the people, right? So.
Yeah, so
Uh,
this is really interesting to hear. One of our internal models that we use at All Aces is it's built of different components, but the last component is what we call collective care. So people talk about self-care a lot, but sometimes maybe you're not in a position to really care for yourself very well. And so collective care is about extending care to other people or creating space for other people so that they can receive care or care for themselves as well. And we're seeing this as something really vital. So, and what you're saying, it seems like that's kind of the overarching theme of traditional medicine in Bolivian cultures. Whereas here in the US, it's very much like, okay, well, we've got these thoughts, these cultural ideas about what medicine should be that sometimes get captured in the phrase Western medicine.
mhm,
That is very explicitly a cultural thing, but most people don't understand it to be that way because they're so surrounded and immersed in the culture that they have not seen other medical practices at work. But a common complaint of the Western style medicine, especially in the US, is that it is not incredibly caring, as you mentioned. Like the bedside manner is often rushed because doctors are busy because they're also trying to make their money. And people are not really, they don't have strong communities. And so they don't have those kind of community members where they have those strong relationships where somebody has a real depth of knowledge to address maybe the healing on a personal, on a family, or on a whole community scale.
mm.
Um, so that's really, really, really fascinating. Um, before we start to wrap up here, I think one question that I do really want to ask you is so you study medical anthropology and sociology. What are some, what would you love to see come out of your work? Like, what impact would you like to have on the world by studying medical anthropology, by studying how groups of people interact?
Well, I think the main thing when I started to be interested in medical anthropology for me it was to make visible things that were happening with traditional medicine in Bolivia. Because when I was looking for information, doing the research before I went to the actual fieldwork, I found some literature about indigenous people, but I noticed that there was a tendency of the scholars to talk just of traditional medicine, and they didn't even mention the Western medicine. And
Mm,
actually, when you go to the communities, you will find that the people are using both of them when they can. So they might start going to the traditional healer, and if they are not feeling well, or sometimes even the traditional healer tells them to go to the hospital, they will go and visit the hospital, the traditional healer. So we should think that the healing process more like a journey,
mm,
and sometimes the journey leads you to different places, different with different people.
yeah.
So my main objective at that time when I started with this was to show that traditional healing is not only a thing of indigenous people, because and you know much better about this. When I did my research in Ecuador, I was studying traditional healing that is happening in cities.
Yeah.
So my second goal is that to b- I want to do research that can be meaningful for policymakers, because sometimes, and this was one of my findings in my research in Ecuador, is that policymakers sometimes only think that traditional healing is happening within indigenous people or in the countryside, and they don't take into consideration this self care, this traditional healing that is happening in urban areas, for instance.
Mm,
So I want to visibilize, if that word works in English, that we should think of traditional healing that is something that is happening between the society, and not only in specific groups
mm.
in the society.
It also sounds like what you're saying is that these two medical traditions can actually complement one another and are not, in fact, in conflict with one another as many people might initially perceive. Is that right?
Yes, yes. Now, many scholars, especially in Spanish, talks about intercultural health,
Yeah.
which means when you well, this when you visit, when you are a user of different traditions, because you can use traditional health, you can go to the biomedicine, to the Western medicine, and maybe you at some point you will decide to use Chinese medicine, and we know that is pretty extended in the world.
Yeah.
So we should think about medicine and healing, the healing processes, like a whole, not like a separated uh,
Right.
areas of knowledge. And of course, now international organizations like the World Health Organization are already thinking about this intercultural health. But sometimes the policies that emerge from these organizations or from the governments, they give more. They are just focusing on Western medicine, and they just think about the other medicines as subordinated to the main medicine. And we
Uh,
should think to think in medicine as a whole, not as parts of
So
something.
it sounds like what you're proposing, Mario, is La Fanesca Medica.
Yes, exactly.
All
That
right,
would
I
be
brought that around.
that would be the
All right. Mario, it's been so great hanging out with you, as it always is. I miss you now that you're back in Bolivia. So I hope that when you're back, we can get back together and hang out like we tend to do. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge with us. I always love having these conversations with you, so I hope that our audience did as well. And thank you also for being able to come back after there was a disruption in your internet, which is, as you pointed out, a very, very kind of closely tied to what we were talking about. So thank you once again. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We are back. Well, I'm not back, but let's see. Dr. Atia Martin is back here with Michael Berkowitz on October 14th, and that is going to be at 5:30 p.m. So please tune in for that. And if you missed us going live on this, you can catch the video recording on our Facebook page or any of our social media. And if you'd like to find out more about All Aces Inc., please head to intentionallyact.com and check us out. Thanks a lot, everybody. Hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.